Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today on Jay Slay, Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. Now, I told you guys I've got a doozy of a guest today, and I do. Jason Jones, our guest, is a walking paradigm breaker. He's the president of the Vulnerable People Project, or VPP, whose faith-based mission is to defend the world's vulnerable people from persecution and violence by promoting human dignity and inspiring solidarity. There's a lot of P's there. Vulnerable People Project, persecution, promoting people. You can't say that very fast. Well, through his work, Jason has freed hostages. He's aided families displaced by the Lahaina fires down in Hawaii. And most recently, over this past year, he's helped vulnerable families in Gaza and Syria who are caught in the crossfire of the ongoing wars. He's a former infantryman, a martial artist, a filmmaker, and author. He's rescued people, listen to this, he's rescued people under death threats from the Taliban, while at the same time, he's received a humanitarian award from the Taliban, the same Taliban. So we'll get to that. He's a bona fide conservative. He's a long-term, lifelong pro-lifer, life leader, and a staunch opponent of COVID mandates. He even got arrested once for some kind of shenanigan regarding COVID. And leaders like Eric Metaxas, Tulsi Gabbard, and Sebastian Gorka consider him a close friend. That's very interesting. Consider all that we're going to talk about today. Today, Jason joins us from the Mexican border. I think he's just there for the burritos. Jason, thanks for coming on today. Glad to have you, brother.
You busted me, Jeremy. I am here for the burritos.
Well, dude, you put on that live stream earlier. Did you know I was on your Instagram live stream earlier today?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
okay.
I did.
Yeah. You didn't want to show us eating it, but you definitely showed off that big fat burrito, man. That looked good.
Nobody wants to see me put a burrito in my mouth.
I'm sure glad you didn't, but I did go have Mexican food right after because it made me hungry.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, man. So what are you doing down there today? I didn't really, let's start, from the present and work backwards. You're in Mexico. You were at the border. What's the mission today?
Well, Jeremy, today was quite a day. And so my brain is mush. So I hope I'm coherent and articulate.
You better
for
lock
your
it
audience.
In. You better lock it in.
Yeah, I'm going to be locked in. I just had a quad espresso for you, which means I won't sleep tonight. It was like be present for Jeremy, but get no sleep. So that was the trade-off I just made.
Sometimes you got to make sacrifices.
You do. I'll watch old movies until 2 a.m. But it's let me just give you a little bit about today. It's been a big day at the Vulnerable People Project. Thanks to the persistence of a great man, Pastor Bill Devlin from Pennsylvania, we were able to donate trucks to take 23 tons of rice that Pastor Devlin, with the Association of Churches, was able to get delivered from Greece all the way to Israel. Then we were able to fund the trucks. They're going into northern Gaza today, which it's obviously a great challenge to get food into northern Gaza. There were 13 girls that were wounded in an ISIS attack and that had been rehabilitating in Pakistan, Afghan girls that are now landing in Canada as we speak. Some have already landed. Others are about to land. Where they'll have a 4-year college education. And I drove a truck from the hill country of Texas, Texas is as big as Afghanistan. I drove from, and I just got over pneumonia, so excuse me. I drove from New Braunfels, Texas, all the way across the state to Juarez, Mexico, to deliver 2021 mint condition Toyota 4x4 to a pro-life pregnancy center in Juarez, and they also have a shelter in El Paso to serve pregnant migrant women. So we got a truck to Juarez, we got rice to Gaza, we got young Afghan students, female students to Canada, all today.
Yeah, man.
And there's a lot that goes into all of that, so it's been quite a wild couple of days.
That is definitely a big day. Let's talk about the faith moorings of this whole thing. There's a Bible verse that's on your website. You mentioned you're going to get your first tattoo, which is this Bible verse. And to me, it's kind of like, I didn't know it was a secret.
Don't tell my wife.
Off the record comment, right? Tell us that verse and kind of like how that feeds into what you do today, because not everybody with your background gets into wanting to serve vulnerable populations. Obviously, a lot of people just live very selfishly. Tell us the verse and kind of your motivation for this whole thing.
Yeah, Jeremy. Well, first of all, I'd say that I think a lot of people, especially your audience, a lot of Christians are really committed to serving vulnerable people, and they do the prudent thing, which is they start close to home, which is usually the home. You may have a grandparent with
Yeah.
Alzheimer's or a child with autism, or you work, you play checkers every Wednesday at the local old folks home, or you support your local pro-life pregnancy center. But just the nature of my life and experiences and opportunities pushed me into a different direction. So I think most Christians, the Holy Spirit, whispers in our ear and tells us to stand with the vulnerable. But I came to my work as an atheist. Actually, I don't know if I told you this. I was an atheist until my late 20s, but I'd been in the pro-life movement and serving vulnerable people, from my local homeless as a young college student, um, to vulnerable ethnic and religious minorities. But it started with me when I was a high school student, and I got my high school girlfriend pregnant. Joined the army as soon as we found out. I actually waited a couple days because I had to be 17, and left straight from high school to Fort Benning, Georgia, in the middle of my senior year. While I was in basic training, I'm a young kid. I'd never been to church, didn't know anything about politics. Um, was just excited that at 17 I was so silly and naive. I actually thought I was the luckiest guy in the world to be a dad so young.
Hmm.
And my high school girlfriend's father, when he found out that she was pregnant while I was in basic training, beat her up and took her to get a forced third trimester abortion.
Ooh.
So, that would be my inciting incident. That scandalized me. That really shocked me. I didn't even know that abortion was a thing until I found out that my child was destroyed through a forced third trimester abortion.
Mm.
And then as a young infantryman, I just kind of knit together this idea that I wanted to spend my life serving vulnerable people. And I was a high school dropout, a teen parent, an infantryman, and I became a father again at 19, 18, and my second child at 19. So I thought, I just want to serve vulnerable people. I want to order my life to stand between the vulnerable and the violent. And this was as a young atheist. I had read Anthem and by Ayn Rand and Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut in eighth grade. And although I was a horrible student, I was very, well read. I was a bibliomaniac starting as a little kid. I was always reading, had no interest in school. But if I wasn't at a library, I was walking several miles to the local bookstore at the mall, and
Yeah.
I would steal books. God forgive me.
Yeah. So as an atheist, you were doing things based on personal experiences that would align with a lot of politically conservative causes, being the pro-life movement and other things, which is a very organic way to get involved politically, because it wasn't like there was this big kind of host group over your head saying, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to believe. You just kind of went there. How did that integration happen, though, with you getting involved with the actual pro-life movement, things like the standing against COVID mandates? I mean, other stuff that would make you a bona fide conservative.
Yeah, you called me a paradox. Even my wife says you're an enigma. I really think I'm, they say I think I'm consistent. No one else agrees with me. They think I'm all over the place. So they say if everyone thinks you're crazy, if you think everyone's crazy, you're crazy. I think everyone's crazy, so I'm probably crazy. I think standing up against COVID mandates, or serving vulnerable migrant women that have been lured into a dangerous underground economy, or running food into Palestinians suffering ethnic cleansing and genocide, and defending the child in the womb, and resisting COVID mandates, which are actually putting the most vulnerable at risk. It caused the greatest famine since World War II, and people never talk about that. And that's something I wrote about in the first weeks of the first mandate, that they were about to starve the world. And so for me, everything comes from this idea of society should be ordered to serve the vulnerable. Conservatism in the English speaking world, in the Anglosphere, is really grounded in, the Declaration principle sums it up. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed, we are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. That's Christian anthropology. Our founding fathers got something wrong. It's not self-evident. I mean, human beings are spectacular. Even as an atheist, that's what led me to Jesus Christ, was the mystery of the human person. But what the founding fathers saw as self-evident, what we see as self-evident, the inviolable dignity of the human person,
Mm-hmm.
was, at the time of the founding, 17 centuries of the gospel of Jesus Christ forming culture, all of the institutions in culture. And so even when I was an atheist, I didn't understand that, I was really became an admirer of the atheist Russian philosopher Ayn Rand, who was ethnically Russian, and she was Jewish, secular, atheist. But even Ayn Rand didn't really understand that her radical individualism was really a reflection, not a full, not the full, reflection, but it was a refraction of the truth of the human person. And that's why I became an atheist. Actually, I was kind of agnostic or indifferent, but when the abortion happened, I remembered Anthem, and I went back. I don't know what made me think of that, and I went back and reread Anthem, and I read everything Ayn Rand wrote, and I became a Randian atheist.
Hmm.
And I say that it was Ayn Rand and Roe v. Wade that led me to being a Christian.
Huh.
You asked a great question. How did I discover the pro-life movement? I would go door to door as an atheist, as a young soldier in my off days, and I would knock on doors in Hawaii outside my base. I was stationed at Schofield Barracks, and I would just tell people abortion was legal and ask them if they thought it should be illegal, and if they would help me knock on doors. And
Huh.
I would give people the CQ desk number at our base. This was in the late 80s. We didn't have cell phones, and we just had one phone at the desk that we all got calls at. And I would give people the desk number. And I got a call one day from a woman who was upset with me, saying, for going around Hawaii representing their organization, saying I worked for them. And I had never heard of their organization, didn't know what she was talking about. And I said, well, what's your organization? It was Hawaii Right to Life. And she told me what they did. And my first thought was, we have a group? I didn't know we had a group. I
Yeah.
didn't know we had a
Wow.
cause. I didn't know the phrase right to life, pro-life, right. I didn't know any of this. This was before cable news was really readily available for most people. CNN, we didn't watch cable news. You still had to use the card catalog. In fact, the one thing I had on abortion was a book called Roe v. Wade in Focus that was from my base library, and it was published by the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is the research arm of Planned Parenthood. Like, that's all I had.
Wow.
And so when I discovered Hawaii Right to Life, I was off to the races.
Yeah.
I was so excited to meet
Is that
like-minded people.
is that
Yeah.
Jason sort of what trampolines you into what we called off-camera conversation, kind of the conservative country club? And this isn't bragging on you or whatever, but this just saying you do have connections in a lot of high places in the Christian and the conservative world, and a mixture of those two. I mentioned a few names earlier. When you've worked with the Trump campaign, like, not everybody gets the opportunities that you have gotten, Jason, even if they've worked in the pro-life movement their whole life. So what is that does that have to do with your film career or what?
I think it's strange. I think it has to do with the prayer I made as a naive atheist.
Okay.
I well, after I got out of the Army, I went to the University. I actually went to Leeward Community College, and I got involved with I created the Pro-Life Student Union. There was no Pro-Life Club. I created the Pro-Life Student Union. We didn't have these great groups like Students for Life of America that exist today. So I just kind of created this pro-life club out of thin air. And I became involved with the Young Americans for Freedom, which was a wild and fun group, and became involved with the college Republicans at the University of Hawaii. And that's where I learned about the battle, like what's a rhino, and not, to be pro-life in Hawaii in the Republican Party in the early 90s, mid 90s was a battle, and so that's where I learned that it's not clean cut. It's not
Right.
conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat. In fact, in Hawaii, there were so many pro-life Democrats that were passionately pro-life, like the mayor at the time, who I became friends with, Mayor Frank Fossey. And that was just an early opportunity. I would MC his fundraisers because I was chairman of the college Republicans. He was running for governor as a Democrat, and I endorsed him for governor. So I'd be on stage with all these union leaders, emceeing events, and I'm this young kid in his 20s. And so, I'll tell you, it is a bit mysterious how I've been able to knit together friendships that are uncanny.
Yeah.
And I really think it has to do with the prayer. When I became director of Hawaii Right to Life, while I was in grad school in the late 90s, I thought, I'm off to the races. Like, now I'm in charge. Let's get this done. The eagle is here. The turkeys can go away. And I thought I'd end abortion in like a week and a half. I think everyone who enters the pro-life movement, you're all like, you don't know what you're doing. Let me show you how it's done.
Right.
And one of two things happens. You get humbled and stick around, or you just, pout, run away and say, I could have done it, but for those people. And we were trying to ban third trimester abortion, one procedure in the third trimester, partial birth abortion.
Yeah.
It got held up in committee. I canvassed this woman's district, who was chair of the committee, to get it through her committee onto the floor for a vote. And I got like 93% of the registered voters in her district to sign my petition, and she still didn't hear it. And we had Dr. Alan Keyes, Ambassador Alan Keyes, come to Hawaii and speak. He had this really eccentric, interesting handler who I got his phone number, and I called him. He gave me Dr. Keyes' cell phone number because I was just so frustrated. And I said, Dr. Keyes, I've been doing this for 10 years. This is 99. I've been doing this for 10 years. When you're 27 years old and you've been doing something for 10 years, it seems like forever.
Yeah.
I will say I felt like I'd been in the pro-life movement longer then than I feel like I've been in it now. As a 53-year-old, that weird way that,
Sure.
And I had felt like I'm just ruining my whole life, wasting my whole life. I called Dr. Keyes and I said, I don't know what to do. I'm chairman of the Young Republicans. I'm chief of staff for a state representative. I'm director of Hawaii Right to Life. I have a radio show. I couldn't do anything more in my state. I can't get one bill that bans one procedure in the third trimester even onto the floor for a vote. What should I do with my life? And Ambassador Keyes said to me, he probably doesn't even remember me. I mean, he may remember me because I worked on his campaign later, but not from, and I said, Dr. Keyes, I called him and he said, the darker the world becomes, the further your light will shine. Just pray. And I'm an atheist. And I got so angry that my hero would say something so cavalier. And I said, well, thank you, Dr. Keyes. And I hung up and I was like, these Christians, this is why I was prideful. These Christians, if they don't have a sense of urgency, they put everything on God's shoulders. What about our shoulders? This is our job to do. And so I said a prayer. I was so angry. I said, I'm going to say a prayer. I hope there's someone out there that can hear it. And I said, God, if you exist, I don't believe you're real. And if you're real, I can't see how you're any good, because I'm no good. And I wasn't. I don't want you to think I was a little choir boy. I was an atheist pro-lifer in Hawaii in the 90s. Use your imagination, right? Living on a street with lots of bars. It was a bit of a scandal. And I said, God, if you exist and you want me to acknowledge you, I'll do that. But you just have to give me three things. I want to rise up rich people, famous people, and powerful people to stand for the vulnerable, to stand with the child in the womb, and I'll serve them. Rise them up, Almighty God. And if you look at sort of my apostolate, my work from that day till this day, it was just a few months after that I got a job offer in DC. And next thing you know, I'm on CNN and Fox, and Bill Maher's Politically Incorrect. And next thing you know, I'm making movies. I'm working on the marketing team for The Passion of the Christ. In a very small way, I was asked to go speak at college campuses. And then we produced our first film, Bella. I was an executive producer on that. And it wasn't until I was at the UN in 2010 with the movie I made with Eduardo Verastegui and Patty Millett, the mother of Justin Bieber. And I'm at the UN and we showed the film and the credits are rolling and I see my executive producer's credits and I see all the ambassadors of the world applauding. And I promise you, I heard God whisper in my ear, what do you want now? Smart guy. You wanted rich? I gave you the richest, because some of the people that funded that film Crescendo, which is on YouTube for everyone to see, I'm very proud of it, was one of the richest men in the world. You wanted powerful? I saw the countries of the world. Famous, Patty Millett and Justin have a very pro-life story. And I thought, the mother of the most famous young person in the world at the time was my executive producer. And God's like, what do you want now? And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to ask, I'll ask. And I realized there was nothing to ask for but grace. That I felt God had given me everything I had asked for. Friendships with wealthy people, famous people, powerful people who are as committed to me as me, or maybe even more committed to me as defending the child in the womb. But yet I felt helpless. And so it is a mystery to me. God didn't make me rich. He didn't make me famous. He didn't make me powerful. I didn't ask for that. I wouldn't want that either, because those are severe burdens that I don't think my character isn't, it's hard to stand up as where I am now, but I can't imagine that my character could weather the burden of wealth, fame, or power.
Yeah.
And, but he gave me those friends. That's true. And I'm grateful for that.
That's good. Well, that's a beautiful story. I was going to ask you to read or recite the verse, but I've got it right in front of me because I think it's a great theme for everything we're going to talk
Oh, I
about.
can go back to that. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Well, if you got it memorized, go ahead and say it.
I know it, brother.
We'll go for
Ecclesiastes 4:1. I looked all over the world. I'm going to give you the translation I love best.
Sure.
I looked all over the world, and all I see is oppression. This is Solomon, the richest, most powerful man in the world at the time. I look all over the world, and all I see is oppression. And on the side of the oppressor is power. And on the side of the oppressed, there is no one. I read that as an atheist. My mentor was Jewish. I was his chief of staff, Mark Moses, the most beautiful human I've ever met. And we would study scripture together. He was kind of secular Jewish. He thought Jesus was the Messiah. And I was an atheist, and we would, started reading the Bible together. And I remember when I read Ecclesiastes 4:1, I said, I'm going to take that as a challenge. I'm going to, even though I wasn't a Christian, I want to stand against power with the vulnerable. That was going to sort of be my North Star. Yeah. And so that's kind of what knits together what I do.
Well, that's a beautiful thing. And it leads into the paradigm breaking that I want to discuss a little bit today. Do you mind sharing the story you told me? I know we're not supposed to talk about the tattoo, but
I'll talk about it.
Yeah.
My wife knows.
Okay. So as you go to these events coming up, you said, when people shake my hand, they're going to ask me about this tattoo. And when they ask, and the tattoo is going to be that verse, you're going to tell them the verse. And if I get this right, I think you said, you're going to say, are you going to stand with the oppression of the Palestinians? Are you going to stand with the vulnerable Palestinians? No. Are you going to stand with the oppressed or the powerful? Right. And let them answer. And when they say, of course, the vulnerable, the oppressed, then you'll say, thank you for standing with the oppressed Palestinians. There's so few of us, and give them a big hug.
That's right. That's the plan. So I got this famous artist. She only had 4 days open in 2025. Now imagine I was an infantryman, no tattoos. I fought in Japan in my 20s for the Kyokushinkai. No tattoos. Yeah. They had me drunk in Tokyo at 24 years old. They were going to give me a tattoo on my neck of the Kyokushinkai symbol. And I was like, through my drunkenness, no. I made it this far, 53 years old. My wife is like, what are you doing? But I said, no, I'm going to get the tattoo right here. January 4th, I wrote a letter to this famous tattoo artist. She's Iranian, and I wanted her to do it. I don't even know what she's going to design, but it's going to be Ecclesiastes 4:1. And just the idea is, where's the camera?
No, well, yeah, right there.
When I shake their hand, they see it. Mm-hmm. And hopefully they'll ask me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I can't say enough. I can't talk enough. I can't write enough. I can't do enough shows.
The reason that I call this a paradigm break, and my audience is going to understand this completely, and they know the pain that I've been through the last 12 months for speaking a different message than most Christian conservatives, especially in the Christian Zionist kind of Bible Belt. Part of it's due to my research and looking deeper and yada, yada. But you're really quickly in the United States and through our media put into one of two camps. You're either pro-Israel, the good guys, or you're pro-Hamas. And especially with conservative media, that's what Fox News would say. If you have any desire to be not desire to be critical of Israel, but if you are in any way, or if you really look at the numbers of deaths, I mean, that's what kills me is there's the death tolls on the Palestinian side versus the Israeli side is so lopsided. It's incredible. And, and then on top of that, one of the names of their artificial intelligence bombing platforms is the gospel. So here I'm a Christian. I'm like, maybe there's something more going on here. I want to talk about this. And that's cost me something. So here you are going to these events with that tattoo, asking them if they're going to stand with the vulnerable, and you're going to lead them into extreme cognitive dissonance. So I guess the question in all of that is this: how do you think that we as Christians in the United States, when we look over there, if say we don't know a lot, not really researched a lot, but you want to know how to, what should my posture be as a Christian toward Israel and Israel's enemies?
Yeah, it's a very complex question. And, I think at the heart of it is I wrote an article called Help, I'm an Anti-Palestinian Bigot, in anticipation for people accusing me of being an anti-Semite
So you kind of knew
because I'm
you were going to get called
advocating.
that?
I'm sorry?
You figured people would call you an anti-Semite for the work you do?
And strangely they haven't. Um, but I anticipated it, and sure enough, others do. I'm a little protected by the nature of my job.
Okay.
My organization rescued a man who I love, really love. He's the last Jewish guy from Afghanistan. We rescued him.
Wow.
Not the one the world knows, the older guy. This is a younger guy, and I could tell you stories about him. He's a saint. And it was a Jewish man, a Zionist man who I love, who is a saint, who brought him to our attention. And so we helped him. And then actually, we had this undercover Jewish guy. Like, he didn't tell people he was Jewish, obviously, even when he was in Humanitarian City in Qatar. And VPP, like, we kind of, I can say this now because it's closed. We found some guards to pay off at Humanitarian City, some African guards. We paid off one guy. I told this guy was one of the head guards that we would pay for his daughter's Catholic education for a year, which, believe it or not, was not that much, a couple $1,000s. It was boarding school and everything. If he let us throw a party for the refugees in Humanitarian City. So we brought in food and music. It was at Christmas time. We didn't call it a Christmas party. Obviously, they're Muslims, although there were Christians there as well. But the guy that threw the party, hosted the party, was a Jewish guy. So it was like we had a Jewish Afghan throw a Christmas party for Muslims in Humanitarian City. And so people know I did that. On October 7th, the first thing we did is in some African countries where synagogues were exposed to Islamist extremism, where we were already putting security guards and cameras out front of churches, we added the synagogues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm a Christian. I have friends who are Muslim and Palestinian I love. I have friends who are Jewish and they were at my wedding and served in the IDF or served in the IDF who I love. And I'm a Christian. They're all my brothers and sisters. All of them are my brothers and sisters. Zionism is a virulent ideology. And most Zionists are not Jewish. Most Zionists are Christian in the world.
Mm-hmm. They are.
And 56% of Jews in the United States oppose any further arms transfers to Israel. Okay. So I look at this just through the lens of the gospel, which tells us there's no longer Jew or Gentile. I'm so grateful for the privilege and grace of being a Christian. And I don't even mind when they hate me. In fact, maybe because I'm sanctimonious, I love when people hate me and I'm like, and I can still love them. That's great. That's cool.
Yeah.
So how do I look at it is, I look at it at many levels, the humanitarian level, the political level. But I want to use my life to serve the most vulnerable. When I write, I want a political order that's ordered to serve the vulnerable. Power is either ordered to serve the vulnerable or to exploit the vulnerable. And
Yeah.
it is only the grace of the Holy Spirit and the gospel that could get anyone to really, you're learning the courage that it takes. It is a horrible thing. And you're braver than me, brother, because you're an evangelical, so I know you're getting hate. It is a horrible thing. For people like you to be called a bigot or a hateful or to be called an anti-Semite simply because you want to stand with Semitic people, because the Palestinians are Semitic. In fact, the only people more Semitic than the Palestinians are the Samaritans.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry about the Jews. And I often say, like, this ball is going to bounce so bad for Israel and the Jews.
Yeah.
I don't like bringing that up because it's as if in our society, that's the only good reason to stop this hell on earth. No, the Palestinians aren't ending themselves. But this ball is going to bounce. It's going to bounce. It's going to bounce. And so what I want to do is order my life to serve the vulnerable, whether they're in Tel Aviv, whether they're in Gaza, whether they're in Damascus, whether they're Shia, whether they're Sunni. The Shia, that we're supposed to celebrate that the fall of Assad, and I apologize if I'm bouncing all over. I warned you I'm exhausted and had a wild couple of days, but we're supposed to celebrate that the Sunni crescent has been destroyed. But the Sunnis have been long-term defenders of Christian minorities. And by the way, now the Sunnis are being beheaded and their most holy religious sites are being destroyed by ISIS, ISIS affiliates, Al-Qaeda, rebranded Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda Light.
Jason, everybody needs to know what you just said. Rebranded Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda Light. There's and the people that I respect, in not even in the news, but pastors and others who know the things that you know and that I might know some of, have said we have funded, we have created these groups, and we have rebranded them to carry out our purposes. And so if they're working against us now, it's really partly our fault. You still there, Jason? Got a technical difficulty here, folks. Hold on. Anyway, we're back after a little technical difficulty there. And, Jason, I'm going to say some things here that come from my experience. I know they don't come from yours. So just so my audience knows, Jason is not lending approval or credibility to anything I'm saying. This is me saying it, but this is my journey of understanding the conflict a little bit. And I know, Jason, you've said in the past, you don't want to weaponize history. This isn't trying to weaponize history or taking a side. I was brought up as a Christian Zionist, especially when I got involved with a megachurch in the Southeast. The megachurch pastor that's there now is known by several Jewish publications as the fourth most prolific pro-Israel pastor in the country. Not saying anything wrong with that, but you could see that's the environment that I came up in. And, then 9/11 happens and, I'm a college student. I was at the point, Jason, where I was telling my missionary friends in the Middle East what we should do. And I said this out loud to my shame. I said, we should put a big iron dome, pardon the pun, because there is really an iron dome. We should put a big iron dome over Israel and nuclear bomb every place around it. Because I thought that would help speed along God's plan. It would ultimately be fewer deaths, because I just thought all the big bad bullies are out to kill sweet, pure, innocent, God's chosen people, Israel. That was my posture. As I got into culture, politics, and the desire to seek the truth, just like the catchphrase at the beginning of my show, or the motto, explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. Well, a lot of my theology came from the Schofield Bible, and it's, and the kind of the outpouring of that over the decades. And so I said, you know what? I want to study the history of Israel. I want to really learn how this thing came about from way back, with the early settlements to the Balfour Declaration to Rothschild, to how did they actually settle this place? And was it really uninhabited, or were there people there? And I'll make this quick, but I learned some things. I learned about the Nakba for the first time. I learned about the bombing of the King David Hotel, because they were really ready for these British mandate people to hurry up and get out of there and get the Palestinians out of there. So they dressed up as Arabs and they went and they bombed this hotel, and there was 120 deaths, some of which were Jewish, some were Arab, but mostly were British deaths, because they just wanted them gone. And I know I'm giving a quick history here, but then I go through and I learned some of the falsehoods about some things in the I believe it was 67 war. I'm probably wrong by a year or so. I learned some things about 9/11 that I'm not going to get into on this show, but that completely flipped my perspective on that. And then we get to October 7th, and this is the big paradigm shift for me. The day October 7th happened, I knew enough, and I knew enough about the Greater Israel Project, which is an expansion that going back to David Ben-Gurion and before his time, that the early Israeli settlers wanted this. And they came up with this thing called offense by defense. And you can see even their name, IDF, defense, we're defending. Well, it's very offensive in nature too, especially since October 7th. And I remember I just thought, oh my gosh, they're going to use this, if they didn't allow it to happen, as a way to bomb the shit out of everybody around them so that they can take the land and the resources under the guise of rescuing hostages. That's what I believe. That is not for my audience. Jason Jones didn't say that. I said it based on my studies. Now, does that mean that I hate Jewish people? Absolutely not. I went and had lunch with my Jewish friends the other day. We talked for 3 hours on this. And I said, Bud, like, who do you think are the true Israelites today? Who's God's chosen? His response to me was incredible. He said, John the Baptist said, from out of these stones, I could raise up children of Abraham. You and me are both God's chosen people, buddy. It was awesome. I love that. So I say all that because that's my perspective. I want to hear from you, Jason, on your experiences, especially over this last since October 7th, and you having boots on the ground in these places. You don't have to answer what I said, but what are your thoughts about this war and the continuation of it?
Oh, thank you for that. Well, first of all, I would say that um, I see Zionism as, one of the last ethno-nationalist violent enthusiasms that erupted in the West in the late 19th, early 20th century. So I see it in that context.
There's
Um,
others? What would others be?
yeah, you can think of like the Thule Society. Are you familiar with the Thule Society?
No, I'm
The
not.
Thule Society was a German secret society that really um, was sort of came out of almost wholesome associations in Germany
Okay.
to like rediscover German poetry, dance around the
Right.
maypole,
Yeah.
and then it sort of morphed in sort of these violent into a violent ethno nationalist ideology.
I guess
Now,
I did know of one then. Not Nazism would be an ethno nationalism, correct?
yeah, and there's also you Han China, I would say that today in China, there's a virulent ethno nationalism. There's the Hinduva that you have in India today. This violent ethno nationalism, which is quite frightening. You have in one province alone, 380 churches were destroyed out of 420 churches. So you have violent ethno nationalism erupting in India. And again, I would say even in India and China, it does have some strains that pour into India and pour into China from the West. I also know the violence that happened in the Middle East and it continues to happen in the Middle East because I have to deal with it. So um, uh, we serve Afghans, right? Some are Sunni, some are Shia. The Shia have to really be worried. They suffer really. I'll just look at a wonderful people that I work closely with, the Hazara in Afghanistan. They're brutalized in Iran, a Shia country, because of their ethnicity. They're Hazara, even though they're Shia. They suffer cruel brutality. In Pakistan, you have the Baluch. Google those guys. They are really bad dudes that prowl the border to slaughter Shia. So the Hazara are being slaughtered by Muslim Sunnis because they're Shia. They're slaughtered and brutalized by Shia Indians because of because of their ethnicity. I know the history of the Middle East. Um, the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the borders. You have all these peoples that were under empires that are now nation states. And so that you'd ask me about cantonization. And I always do talk about I do not want to weaponize history. The first victims of Zionism are Jews. The first victory of Maoism, the first victims of Zionism were Jews. The first victims of Maoism were Han Chinese, not the Tibetans, not the Uyghur. Um, the first victims of the Nazis were Germans. So and so that's how I see Zionism. It is brutal, and Christian Zionism is even more brutal. Like you confessed, like you said, you can read books like by guys like Jonathan Cahn. They're horrifying, and then you can hear Christians say things like Palestinians are Amalekites and the Jews will be punished until they're destroyed, and that's so goofy, bizarre. I had a prominent Catholic journalist say to me, Jason, again, excuse me, I'm just getting over pneumonia. Jason, the Palestinians aren't really Christians. They have been Arabized. I said, well, do you know that Arabs were in the upper room when the Holy Spirit descended and the church was birthed? Did you know that? I'm Scottish. I'm Scotch, Irish, and English. Yeah, none of my ancestors were in the upper room. The Arabs were there, though. And so, you see this virulent ideology. And so, look, you can listen to Ben Shapiro list a litany of violences that Jews have suffered in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe, and a lot of truth will be in there. The Palestinians, obviously, they don't even have to reach into the distant. They don't even have to reach into the 20s and 30s and 40s, which they most definitely can. and list a litany of abuses. But one thing I know, that I work with the Uyghur and Chinese occupied East Turkestan. I work with the Pashtun and the Hazara and the Tajiks in Afghanistan. I have safe houses across Central Asia. I work in Iraq with the Shia and the Sunni and the Yazidi. And, most people are wondering, what's for dinner? How's my kid doing in school? And they don't want to cut their neighbor's head off. But, we have been taught, Christian Zionism and Zionism will tell you that every Palestinian child is trained to murder and want to kill all of us. It's absurd. It's utterly insane. When I went to Egypt to do clandestine interviews in June of Palestinians that we had evacuated because they were wounded to Egypt for medical treatment, as I was interviewing the Palestinians, I could not believe, and you can go to the vulnerablepeopleproject.com and see my interviews, at how well educated and humane. And as each interview, I was like, wow, they're so broad-minded and humane, and they're not radical. And the Palestinians are known in the Middle East as the most educated people.
Really?
And yes. And so as I was interviewing them, I sounded like Joe Biden talking about Barack Obama. He's so clean. He said he's so clean and articulate. I was kind of like, I'm so surprised how clean and articulate they are. And that's when I wrote the article, Help, I'm an anti-Palestinian bigot.
Yeah.
I know I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm not anti-Jewish. It's insane to say that. Yet I've been pretty aggressive standing up to what Israel's doing to the Palestinians. Yet I have to confess, I am still addled by anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab prejudice. Still,
Yeah.
you know.
Well,
But it doesn't change the fact that I don't want to see 20,000 dead children in Gaza. I don't want to see all northern Gaza starve to death. I don't want to see every standing building in northern Gaza destroyed. I don't want to see a people group that has lived there since before Christ ethnically cleansed. My prejudice tells me about me. It does not tell me about the people I hold prejudices against. And so that's why I think we have to be very careful to weaponize. We do not want to, our ancestors have left us plenty of landmines. I want to dig up as many as I can, and I want to plant olive trees. I want to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, that's easy for me to say. If I was a Palestinian, it would be much harder. I even forgive people their bigotry. It doesn't, when people are aggrieved and they are wounded, we all understand as Christians the problem of pain and human suffering when someone else's child is dying of leukemia.
Yeah.
It's much more difficult to understand it when it's your own child.
Uh-huh.
And maybe as a Christian, I can sit over here and have, empathy for someone's bigotry because I'm not suffering it. I can, look at some anti-Hazara prejudice and try to apply, some empathy and understanding to it. But obviously, when you're the aggrieved person, it's challenging. But what I want to do is, how do we as Christians, and here's the problem, I don't believe Christians were pulling our weight. We allow people whose intellect has not been illuminated by the grace and fruits and gifts of the Holy Spirit to rule this world. And I think that we really should shoulder check our way into positions of influence. Mm-hmm. But we know who's the ruler of this world. But so rather than dig around and rummage around and find a lot of things that are true, and I'm not saying that shouldn't be done, but that's not what I'm called to do. What I really want to do is what we say in our website. Like, our mission is to defend the vulnerable from violence by telling the truth about the dignity of the human person, whether it's a child in the womb, the Uyghur, the Hazara, a Palestinian, a Jew, a white kid at an American university who's being brutalized by the leftist faculty. And then say, well, we should stand in solidarity with them. That's why I admire people like you, because I know that this is not easy and it can turn your whole world upside down.
Well,
and the hardest part is you lose friends.
Well, I got to tell you, Jason, part of the reason that I do have some courage in this area has to do with guys like Khalil Sayegh. And he's the only reason that I knew about you. I don't know where Khalil is at the moment, but it was early this year, maybe in March. I was pretty much taking the stand that I'm taking now, but I mean, my DMs and all this, I mean, that's not real persecution, but it felt like it to me. I was being called an anti-Semite. I was being called, Jew hater and that you know nothing, and that they would say things like, the Palestinians would behead you and kill you in a minute if you walked through their town. And I knew, and here's the thing.
Crazy talk.
Then I go and I watch you interview a Palestinian Christian who's lived there his whole life with his family, telling his story. And this guy's, and I understand it's war and horrible things happen in war, but it was much deeper than his sister and dad were accidentally killed. I mean, these are many times targeted things. So my point is to say this: like, people are so obtuse, and and it's not all their fault. They've been victimized by a brainwashing that says if you were to walk through Palestine as a Christian, they would kill you on the spot. And you start to believe, like, yeah, if Israel doesn't wipe them out, there will be an Islamic caliphate they'll set up in the United States.
Yeah, no, and what's fun, what you didn't see in that video with Khalil is him try to cut my head off. I edited that part out.
You had to protect the whole narrative, right?
Yeah, it's propaganda, dude. Let me tell you about that video. First of all, he's a Christian. Yeah. He said he didn't like pasty white guys. I think that was his mantra. But no, look, that guy is a saint. The IDF killed his sister, his father, nearly killed his mother, just recently wounded his other sister, killed multiple cousins of his, bombed his church. And this is a man who worked for an organization that was advocating for Israelis and Palestinians a year and a half ago. This is a man who to me said, he says, I do not want people to use what the state of Israel is doing against the Palestinians to get some poor Jewish kid beat up in Germany or in France or in a Harvard Yard. He has the humanity that I don't have, because I said, Khalil, if what happened to your family happened to mine, ISIS wouldn't be radical enough.
Yeah.
And yet this man, and I asked him, how do you remain? And he has very close Jewish friends. I said, how do you weather this? How can you be, be so kind, so understanding and kind? And he said, I take the gospel of Jesus Christ seriously. I interviewed other Christians that were personally brutalized by the IDF in Israel. And they said, I feel so sorry for these young soldiers who are poorly trained and infected with prejudice and propaganda, because there's going to come a day where they're going to hate themselves. And I feel sorry for them. And they're being sincere. And you can see in these videos. And by the way, I shot this video in what was considered one of, we had to do it in a place where, the people say Israel's surrounded by countries that want to destroy them. Who? Jordan? Lebanon? Who? Egypt? We had to hide from Egyptian intelligence to record these videos. So we had to set up a studio in the most unlikely neighborhood for a guy like me to show up, in the basement of a building in the middle of Cairo. I'm walking around town buying Coca-Colas, talking to kids. And no, you're right. Most people, they're addled with this prejudice that we still have. I mean, every, movie in the 80s was Bruce Willis or Chuck Norris or somebody fighting off, gross caricatures of Arabs,
They're still doing it I follow the special forces community pretty closely, and there's a lot of heroes that have been set up in that community. And they talk about Iran every chance they can get. They talk about Islamic terrorism, and to be fair, that's a big reason they signed up for the military, was they fully believed their version or the American version, really, of what happened on 9/11. And I don't want to get off topic here, but can
I ask a favor, brother? I'm at 4% when the Wi-Fi got dropped from my hotel. Yeah. Can I grab my charger? Would that ruin the balance?
Grab it. Yeah, all good. I'll be right back, folks. I'm grabbing something here that I want to
show. This is Gorilla, brother. I wanted to do the interview in Juarez, but the shelter for the women didn't have did not have Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Well, the point I was trying to make is Russia and Islamic terrorism are the two that in Hollywood movies, and
sorry,
that's all right.
Sorry.
No worries. I'll set up there.
Special. Do you guys believe I'm also a filmmaker? Could anyone believe that? At this point.
That's awesome.
I have to put that between the two glasses so the charger can charge and make it even without falling.
Perfect.
And I'm going to have to hold it the whole time, guys. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
So we won't take too much longer, but so we know there's propaganda, and we know sometimes, certain times, there's good reason for propaganda to get maybe the American people on your side to believe a certain thing. However, I'm going to push back on you for a second, because I know where my mind would have gone 2 years ago, and where a lot of my friends, they would say, "What are you talking about, Jason? The Hamas charter says that we need to wipe Israel off the map." And other countries have said the same. Hezbollah and others, they've said we need to wipe Israel off the map. They don't need to be here at all, from the river to the sea. So when you say who, well, let's talk about that for a minute, because those charters exist.
Okay, let's talk about Hamas. Well, first of all, the last time Hamas never won the majority of the Palestinian vote. Never. 50% of the residents of Gaza were born after Hamas came to power. 50% of Palestinians in Gaza are children. Can you imagine that? 50%. And I'm not going to deny that there aren't Palestinians after decades of unimaginable abuse. I mean, if you're not, if Palestinians haven't been radicalized after this, every Palestinian should get a Nobel Prize, because they have suffered the kind of abuse that is absolutely unimaginable, unbelievable. Yet, I have never in my life heard from a Palestinian the kind of rhetoric I've heard from Christian Zionists. There was a gentleman, and I could out him. He's an influential guy. He works for a prominent organization, but we had a friendship, and so I'm going to honor that. He was trying to get me to go on trips sponsored by this organization to Israel after October 7th. In fairness, they were trying to get me to go for years. But I have a rule. I don't take trips. I was invited by Putin to Moscow in 2010. I don't sign up to be influenced by foreign governments. So I didn't go. And after October 7th, of course, I wasn't going to go. But he would always use he's Catholic, and he would use the language of a Catholic. And he would try to make, he was giving the carefully crafted arguments, trying to persuade me. And then we had kind of a big blow up. And at the end of the big blow up, he said, well, the Palestinians are stupid. They have the lowest IQ of any ethnicity in the world. And he just ranted and spewed hateful prejudice and bigotry. And I said, you don't sound very Catholic to me, brother. You don't sound like a Christian when I hear you speak. He said, I'm not really that Catholic anyway. The guy that his whole spiel to me was how Catholic he is and how Catholics, blah, 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 blah. I have heard, you can listen to Ben Shapiro. You can read Jonathan Cahn. I've met Jonathan Cahn, by the way. I'm in a book, The 50 Greatest Pro-Life Leaders of All Time, with Reagan and Pope John Paul II and Mother Teresa. There's a chapter on me, and the foreword was written by Ben Shapiro. I've met the guy.
Amazing. So that's amazing.
I've met Jonathan Cahn. He's quite a charming fellow. I liked him. I did.
Yeah.
And then I read his book, and I said, this is insane. This is Gnosticism. And God forbid anyone believes this. The one thing I've learned from my work at the Vulnerable People Project, and I've had conversations in Darfur in the middle of a genocide with the Janjaweed, the Devils on Horseback, an Al-Qaeda affiliate. And we had ginger cookies and tea. And I've learned that people who are addled by ruthless ideologies can be very kind and loving and decent to the people on their in circle. And very charming. And that's why I'm grateful for the gospel, because everyone falls within our in circle. Everyone. And I think that Christian Zionism is not a heresy. I think it is an apostasy, because Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of every promise to Abraham. Every promise.
Yeah.
Our Lord, Jesus came for the Jew first and then the Gentile. There's not a two paths. And the Jew first. The Palestinians, and I said this to Khalil, I say this every time we speak or we do a show together in public, and he gets mad at me. I always say that, Khalil and the Palestinian Christians, and all Palestinians really, have descendants who were among the very first Christians, those that walked with Christ himself. And that's true. And Khalil will always say, and every Palestinian has always said, they look at me kind of like I'm a dilettante and they're embarrassed. They don't try to weaponize it. I've never seen a Palestinian try to weaponize, hey, James was my cousin and he was the cousin of Jesus. And by the way, I go to church at a church he planted. You know, Halil talks about evangelical Christians will say, oh, when did your family convert? You know, he said, well, when they met Jesus. You know, and they look at him like, well, was it a missionary? No, it was, they've never weaponized this. And I've lost my train of thought, but
No, yeah, well, that's okay. I want to ask you one more kind of geopolitical question,
yeah,
because from the right wing on the conservative side, and that's the news I listen to and all, but you'll hear all the time, hey, Israel, the reason they're our greatest ally, the reason that we need them there doing what they do and being there is they're like a shield that protects the West from this Islamic caliphate. I mean, if you go on and listen to Glenn Beck or Shapiro or any of them, they'll all say what Islam has in mind is a global caliphate. Israel is helping us stop that as almost like a base of operations for us in the West, right there planted in the middle of our adversaries. Now, we didn't apparently need that until 1948. We are more of a global society now. How much truth is there in that statement? Because you're around a lot more Muslims than I am.
yeah. Well, first of all, yeah, some of my best friends are Muslim, and you know, there were 72% of Bethlehem was Christian in 1948. This will be the last Christmas. I mean, I can't imagine for Christians in northern Gaza, and maybe the last Christmas for Christians in Bethlehem in the West Bank. Maybe the last Christmas for Christians in Damascus. By the way, the ancient Christian communities in Iraq have been all but eradicated. And that happened under the nose of George Bush, and none of us noticed or cared. I mean, I did, and I was yelling about it, but I wasn't very good at my job because most of you all never heard of it.
Never heard of it. No.
And so most of the Christians in Iraq were eradicated while Bush was still president. And so I would say that Christians, obviously, it wasn't great. There were always eruptions of violence, yes. But what these dilettantes do is they weaponize history. And so look at European history, how violent it has been. World War I, World War II, the wars of unification in Germany and in Italy, and the French Revolution and Napoleon. And you just can go war after war after war. You can knit together a pretty good narrative that quote unquote Christians or Westerners are the most violent people on earth. And you can go write books like Jonathan Cahn's books and you can sell them in bookstores, but from a Muslim perspective across the Middle East. And it'd be pretty darn easy to make a very compelling story that the West needs to be eradicated because all they do is foment wars and slaughter and genocides all over the world. And so what you see in the West is what these dilettantes do and these ideologues do is they weaponize the truth. A lot of what they say is true about Islamist extremism and pogroms and purges and violence that Christians and Yazidis and other Muslim minorities or Alawites or Jews suffered in the great history of the world. But then to say what you yourself said, that we should just nuke everyone in the Middle East to put an end to this, it's kind of odd. I was on the Michael Savage show. I called. You there, brother?
Yeah, I'm here.
I don't know what happened. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
That's so the short. Oh, tell me when you want me to start.
Well, I want to
It
make sure.
froze and then it just came
Yeah,
back.
you'd made the point about me. Kind of ironic that I would say what I had said about putting a bowl over Israel, bombing the whole Middle East. But I want to tie it back to this Islamic caliphate because that's what the Christians are told to fear all the time. Is that actually they would nuke us right now if they could?
Yeah, it's absurd. I mean, it's absolutely insane. But we would commit genocide there. We're doing it. We're funding genocide. Are there radical Islamist extremists that would, if they could push a button and kill every Jew in the world, do it? Yes. But they're nowhere near the power and they don't have the ability to do it. But it appears to be in Israel and in the Biden administration, there are extremists that if they had a button, they could push it. They have that button, but they know they can't get away with it in the West. So they push it as far as humanly possible. And it's really striking to me how far they've pushed this ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. I mean, it's a total ethnic cleansing. You cannot deny it. And if
Yeah.
all you can do is justify it because you're a bigot, an ethno-nationalist, you are an extremist. You are addled by a violent ideology. And, God forgive me, because I hope they don't repent. I really don't. God forgive me. But I want to say, I wasn't always like, Mr. Humanitarian. When I was a young soldier, I remember sitting around with some of the guys gaming out certain scenarios. And I don't know what we were talking about, but I remember what I said. I said, listen, it was like basically you're president of the United States, and if you had to kill 100,000 people to save one American, would you do it? And I remember what I said. If I was president of the United States, I would be elected to represent the people of the United States. And if I had to kill every man, woman, and child on the planet Earth for one American life, I would do it.
Hmm.
I said that.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was to be. I wasn't a Christian. I was an atheist. And young men are tribal. They show their love for their family and their community by willing to defend them and by willing to commit acts of violence. That's why we send young men to war, because old men are like, I don't know if that's a great idea. That
Yeah.
doesn't make the most sense. Am I going to have to sleep in the mud? And I don't know if I want to do that. I mean, I have to march for 7 days to go kill somebody?
Yeah.
No. But young men are like, I love my country. I love my family. I love my community. And I want to express that love. And what better way to do it in a courageous and self-sacrificing way as a soldier? I was a soldier. My sons were soldiers. My dad's a soldier, was a soldier. My brother was a soldier. My sons I have 2 sons about to go into the military. And but what old men are supposed to do is honor the courage and sacrifice of young men, um, by harnessing and protecting them from their own enthusiasm. I remember when my brother called me from Iraq, he was so upset with Obama's new rules of engagement. And he said something kind of off the wall. And I said, son, to my brother, I said, bro, I want you to treat every man, woman, and child, the civilian that you see, he's my half brother, like you would want your father, our mother, and our sisters treated. But he was just so frustrated because the rules of engagement were putting them in danger. And so the soldiers were responding by just wanting to ignore rules of engagements altogether. So, but what's happened is we're being run by lunatics who've never served in the military. When you listen to people like Lindsey Graham talk, he talks like a 14-year-old playing Risk.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the other thing that's Sebastian Gorka's doing it. I know he's a friend of yours, but he's got the same kind of rhetoric going on. A lot of Trump's people have it going on. And one thing I want to bring up real quick is the way war is done today, especially in Israel. I think you've mentioned, who Norman Finkelstein is, the Jewish kind of
I,
professor, right?
I love Norman Finkelstein. Are
Okay.
you kidding me? He's a wonderful human being.
Norman talks a lot, and he's a Jewish guy, obviously, if you didn't know the name. But he talks a lot about how the war right now, he said the Israeli, and this may not be a fair assessment, but he said it. He said they're really good at playing video games. And with all the artificial intelligence and the bombing programs and all that, that's what they've gotten really good at, much more so than sort of a kinetic boots on the ground kind of combat. Now, I know there's both, but it gets a little scary when you're doing it from a computer screen. That's how you're operating a bombing program in war. And then it's artificial intelligence. So you can say, well, that made the decision, not even somebody, but that thing. And then you've got over here on this side, Lindsey Graham and Gorka and the others all saying we made a mandate to preemptively bomb Iran. Like it just seems like there's no actual investment of anything other than just this is what we want to do.
Yeah, no, you think of no the use of. By the way, it's having a devastating impact. Again, it's almost embarrassing to bring up because we live in a world that's so dismissive of the suffering of the Palestinian people. But I think for this audience and for you and I, we have to be mindful. Again, I love Norman Finkelstein. The guy is wild, um, and I think it breaks his heart because he's Jewish, and so he feels a special culpability. It's like when I was with Shia and Sunni Muslims fighting ISIS, when they would come across the brutalized Yazidis and Christians, they would break down crying to think that these crimes were committed in the name of Islam. And so then you have Norman Finkelstein, a Jew, who, I think takes this, obviously he's very committed to the Palestinian cause. I don't know if he'd be so committed if it was, Estonia was doing this to the Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about AI, and no offense to the Estonians out there, if there's any listening, but you look at Peter Thiel, who was a student of Rene Girard's. I think of myself as a Girardian. I was definitely greatly influenced by Rene Girard, especially in my thoughtfulness to how violent contagions work and the impact on minorities that are in the outgroup. His AI program, Lavender, sucks up everything on everybody in northern Gaza. And so if you're a reporter filing reports, for example, a woman was filing reports on all of the infants being killed by the IDF or being found with dozens of bullets in an infant, you're not double tapped, triple, quadruple tapped, filled with bullets. She was writing article after article on this. After she gave birth and her husband went to get the birth certificate, you probably know the story. There was a targeted attack. I don't know if it was a drone or a missile, went right into her window of her apartment that killed her while she was nursing her baby, and the husband was out getting the birth certificate. Well, why do I think she was targeted? Because some IDF officer said, I'm going to assassinate this busybody reporter? I don't. I think that Lavender, in its assessment of her, included her articles, criticism of Israel, and identified her as an Islamist extremist enemy of Israel.
Wow.
It couldn't say, oh, this is what I believe happened. It's either one of two things. Either you believe some human being said, let's kill this woman, let's assassinate this woman while she's breastfeeding her child. Maybe I'm just being charitable. I don't believe that's what happened. I really don't. I think it was Lavender.
Yeah.
And there's another program called Where's Daddy? And Where's Daddy targets them once they've been identified as a threat. So I think Peter Thiel, a conservative and Trump loyalist, well, I
Well,
don't think of him as a
he
conservative.
funded J.D. Vance's rise to prominence in
Yeah,
politics.
yeah. So his Lavender was, I believe, responsible for the assassination of a brave woman while she was nursing her child, and then her poor husband.
You know, I hate to say this, but I'm going to throw it out there. If I was Eric Metaxas right now, I would say, well, they probably believe that Hamas had a tunnel under this woman's home.
You would have to believe that, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, Hamas has tunnels every single building in northern Gaza because every single building I think has been destroyed at this point. You had every church, every Christian school, and every Christian hospital was bombed. And I can tell you, those ancient Christian churches most definitely did not have tunnels under them. Those two Christian women, those two Catholic women who were standing in the doorway of their church after Mass on their way to the restroom, who were both shot by snipers, were not used as human shields. It's really hard for those who have been. It's hard to believe. Look, this is proof that Israel is a Western colonial settler state. Here's another thing with conservatives: words mean things. We're all words mean things. Words do mean things. Israel is a colonial settler state. It is an ethno-nationalist apartheid state. It is a Western state. Because it is Western, we find it really hard to believe that they would commit atrocities. We find it hard to believe. Now, Russia commits atrocities. Oh, of course. Iran, yes, of course. Arabs, Chinese, everyone but the United States and the Filipinos. We don't, and the Filipinos actually probably don't. It's just, that's what everyone in the world is. They have to have an accent,
Yeah. Well,
and
interesting
not a British accent,
when
not
you
just any other kind of accent.
when you talk about the word colonialism, and this is the last point I'll make, and then I want to ask you about Bethlehem real quick. I was attending a church with a pastor who I love, and he said in his sermon about what happened on October 7th that this idea, this word colonialism that's used, or colony or colonist to describe Israel, is been very modernly and recently picked by woke leftists to help, push forward the leftist American cause. Then I go back and I read Theodore Herzl and I read David Ben-Gurion, and I see that they are proudly using the word our colony, colonial, colonist, settlement. They weren't ashamed of it, but so it's just interesting to me that the modern Christian Zionist church is actually saying something not true, that this is a modern leftist idea to call it a colonial state.
Yeah, no, and it is true. You think of the invasion of Iraq and the lead up and in the immediate aftermath. It was radical leftist groups that said this is going to lead to forever wars and forever regime change wars. Now, when Obama got elected, they all evaporated into thin air, and Obama killed more civilians with drones than the American president.
I've heard that.
And they didn't, and I wrote an article about it called "Flying into the Abyss: John Brennan's Drone War in 2013, where I had leaked to me the names of every child killed in a U.S. drone strike. I published their names, their ages, and their country. It's Alatea magazine, "Flying into the Abyss: John Brennan's Drone War." Um, it's we need. I know we're coming to the end of the show. What I want to do is, like I said, I don't want to weaponize history. History can be weaponized. My friends that you mentioned can weaponize Islamist atrocities on Christians and Jews and Yazidis. The Palestinians can weaponize the brutality of Zionists to their grandparents and great grandparents and to their families. And Khalil can talk about how the IDF killed his sister, his father, and wounded his mother and his other sister. Arabs can weaponize the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which they do, and the way the West tried to set the Middle East up to be a tinderbox, easy to control and exploit. And when we weaponize history, we usually are weaponizing truth to tell lies.
Mm.
And what I want to do is order my life to leave our posterity a peaceful future. And it may be futile. Tolkien said that as a Christian, he actually said as a Catholic, we have to recognize that history is the long defeat. And that may be true. That's very sad. But then I'll go back to what Dr. Ambassador Alan Keyes said to me when I was sitting in the Right to Life office in Manoa Valley in Hawaii in 1999. The darker the world becomes, the further our light will shine. The reason I work in Gaza, we got the rice in today, thanks to Pastor Bill Devlin, is really just to let them know they're loved, they're thought about, they have dignity, they're not alone. We serve our former Afghan allies who are in hiding to know that we're grateful for their service to this country, that we care about them. And all of our efforts may or may not be futile. But at the end of the day, you're doing the right thing. And obviously you're not driven by bigotry. If you're a bigot, you'd be quiet.
Mm.
You were compelled. I don't know what your inciting incident is. I'd love to have you on my podcast when I wasn't working on the other side of the border all day, but clearly there was some inciting incident.
Yeah.
Where you said everything's going to change from here on out, and I'm going to be compelled to speak up for the Palestinians, because I know you told me the type of church you went. There are people that you love, that you admire, they were your close friends, that now not only don't talk to you, they hate you. They sit around and they go, "What happened to Jeremy?
Yeah.
He used to be such a good guy. Love that guy." And so I just want to thank you. But I think the tide is beginning to turn. But the devil's a judo master. The devil's a judo master.
Yeah.
And don't let him flip you.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think truth is what needs to emerge. That's why I've loved having you on, because, there's people that are standing up for Palestinians on college campuses on the hard left, who they really don't know what they're doing either. I don't agree with either A, the way they're going about it, or B, any of their politics at all. They just know that they're standing against the right wing. I think that's a lot of what it's about for them. But I think that the actual truth coming out on both sides is what really needs to happen. That's what I hope my role can be in this whole conversation. And I thank you for the things that you've said, very complimentary of me on this show. So what I want to do, Jason, is I do want to come on your podcast.
Can I just say one more thing, brother? I want to
Yeah.
give Right Wing Watch something they can use, they can clip up and put on their website.
Okay.
You brought those up on the left. Do I think that they care about Palestinians? Do they care about the Hazara? Do they care about the millions Sudanese that are going to die this year? Do they care about the Coptic Christians? What about the Christians and the Yazidis in Iraq? So I always think there's something mysterious about what's happening with the Israelis and the Palestinians. I say there are those who say they love the Jews but just hate the Arabs and Palestinians. There are those who say they love the Palestinians but just hate the Jews. And I hate them both. So Right Wing Watch. Yeah, and Right Wing Watch, you can use that. But the truth is, by God's grace, I love them both. Wonderful. And not as peoples, they're people. They're our family. They are our family. And when we see our brothers and sisters captured by an ideology of hatred and bigotry, we don't hate them, we try to rescue them. Because the first victim of these perverse ideologies is a person that's been infected by them. And so, that's what we're called to do as Christians. I believe it's in the Hadith that Muhammad said that if you're persecuted, you can always run to the Christians. They'll defend you.
Wow.
And I think that's what we want to be known for. That if you're Jewish, if you're Yazidi, the only people, Jeremy, that I will not stand to protect are you Protestants.
I've kind of gathered that. We'll have another.
I'll be like, I can't fight every battle. You can't fight every battle.
Hey, likewise, then, man. I want to come on your podcast as well. Everybody, thank you for watching. I want you to visit the Vulnerable People Project. You can also find Jason on podcast at the Jason Jones Show. That's right, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I'll provide links to both of those in the description. Guys, be blessed as we go into the holidays, and go check out Vulnerable People Project with Jason Jones. Thanks so much for coming on, brother.
God bless you.